only going to do it working together. If the answer is someone's got the heart and the other folks don't have a heart, we're not going to be able to solve that issue. I'd be happy to yield to my friend from Massachusetts.
I guess my question to the gentleman is that on December 28th, I think it's indisputable, 1,300,000 people will lose their benefit. They've also had their SNAP benefit cut. What do these people do on December 28th? What do they do? Where do they go?
I would say to my friend
Where do they go?
who has incredible expertise on this issue that instead of being on this floor impugning our committee's process or impugning my heart, the gentleman could be hard at work creating a bipartisan, bicameral solution, because the gentleman knows, Mr. Speaker, the gentleman knows that anything short of a bipartisan, bicameral solution is showboating for those folks who are hurting, not doing a dadgum thing to help them. We don't need showboating in this institution, Mr. Speaker. We need results. Which brings me back to the bipartisan, bicameral solutions that this rule has made in order. It wasn't easy, Mr. Speaker, but we came together on a budget for the first time, not in 1 year, not in 2 years, not in 3 years, but more. It's important, Mr. Speaker, because we've come together on a pathway to a farm bill not in 1 year, not in 2 years, not in 3 years, but in more. And we've come together on a process to solve an SGR that has plagued us not for 1 year, not for 2 years, not for 3 years, but for more. This is not a day for acrimony, Mr. Speaker. There's not a person in this chamber who's getting everything they want today. I promise you I'm not. I promise you my constituents are not. This is a day for doing what can be done, and what we're doing today makes a difference. What we're doing today makes a difference. And I ask my colleagues to look at not just what we're doing today, but how it is we came together to do it. Because that is the framework, Mr. Speaker, where we will accomplish the rest of these goals that I know colleagues on both sides of the aisle share. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Michigan, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Ways and Means, to discuss our previous question amendment, which will allow every one of us to vote yes or no on whether we are going to allow 300,000 million Americans to keep their unemployment benefits for 3 months, which is absolutely paid for, does not add a nickel to the deficit. Mr.
Recognized for 3 minutes. Without objection.
I'm glad we're talking about unemployment insurance. We're not showboating. We want to vote. And you misunderstand, if I might say so, the issue. If we don't act on December 28th, 1.3 million people will lose every cent of unemployment insurance. These are people who have exhausted their state benefits. They've exhausted them. These are people who have been laid off through no fault of their own. They're looking for work. When Walmart came to D.C. and asked for applications, 23,000 people applied for 600 jobs. That's the shortage of jobs for people. So these 1.3 million people are people who have exhausted their state benefits and are long-term unemployed. Historically, we have never ended these emergency provisions when unemployment, long-term unemployment, has been as high as it is today, 37%. We've already reduced the average number of unemployment insurance weeks in this country to 37 to 54. And I want to point out to the gentleman and everybody else, if we don't act, another 1.9 million unemployed people will lose every cent of their unemployment insurance the next 6 months. So, under this bill, SGR is now extended for 3 months. We asked the Rules Committee to make an order, an amendment paid for, to extend unemployment insurance for 3 months. And here's what we said. If we can prevent a 25% cut to doctors' pay, surely we can prevent a 100% cut for 1.3 million uninsured. And so what's been the response? The answer from House Republicans is this: an empty box. I ask for an additional 30 seconds.
I'm sorry, Mr. Levin, all time's been allocated.
Okay, well, I
expired.
ended with the point I wanted to make.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, this time it's my great pleasure to yield 3 minutes to a gentleman from Oklahoma, a member of the Rules Committee, Mr. Tom Cole.
Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. I rise today in support of the rule and the underlying legislation, the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2013. You know, I had the privilege of sitting as one of the budget confirmees, and it was an interesting process, but a productive one. This is the first time in a long time we've had a genuine compromise in this body, and frankly between this body and the administration and between this body and the other chamber. And I particularly want to praise Chairman Ryan and Chairman Murray, who worked together in good faith and worked together well, neither one of whom violated their core principles, but both of whom came together and did some pretty extraordinary things in what's a modest bill. First of all, they actually added to deficit reduction over the window. Literally, we will have a somewhat smaller deficit and debt because of what they did than if we keep the current situation. Secondly, they did something we all know needs to be done. They dealt a little bit with mandatory spending and redistributed those savings over to the discretionary side of the budget. And it's because they were able to do that that we're probably going to be able to protect our military from what would have been really devastating cuts under sequester. That's a pretty amazing achievement. But the achievement to me that is the most impressive of all is that they managed to find a compromise that will restore regular order. We all know if this legislation passes, the appropriators from the Senate and the appropriators from the House will be working over the holidays. We'll probably come back and have an omnibus or some series of minibuses, but we will actually have had a somewhat normal appropriations process, and even more importantly, because they've set a top-line number for fiscal year 2015, we can have regular order work in this chamber all year next year. And we will be spared the prospect of a government shutdown in January or again in October. Those are exceptional achievements. I wish it would have been more and different. I know I would have written it differently. I know my friend would have. I know my friends on the other side would have. But we ought to take a step back and thank Chairman Ryan and thank Chairman Murray for what they did to restore the institution as much as what they did to try and work on the budget. They did it the right way. They did it together. It's an example we ought to follow. So I urge the passage of this rule and the support and passage of the underlying legislation. With that, I yield back.
Gentlewoman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on the Budget, and congratulate him for his hard work. Mr. Van Hollen.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend Ms. Slaughter. And I do believe that the budget agreement that was reached was a small but positive step forward, and I plan to talk about that a little later today. But what I want to talk about right now is the abuse of process that has taken place in the last 8 hours and changing the terms of that agreement. Because during that agreement, the Democrats from the House and others put forward a proposal that said, as we deal with the budget issues, we should also deal with what we call the doc fix, making sure that doctors are fully reimbursed to help Medicare patients, but we should also help folks who are about to lose their unemployment compensation. That's what we said, and we put it on paper and offered it. And we said if we do a doc fix for 3 months, we should do a UI extension for 3 months. If we do a doc fix for a year, we should deal with the UI issue for a year. But that was not part of the budget negotiation, even though we wanted to. And Chairman Ryan acknowledged that yesterday, as has Senator Murray. They said we wouldn't deal with either of those two issues, the doc fix or UI, as part of the budget agreement. We would deal with them outside of that agreement. And yet the ink was barely dry, Mr. Speaker, on that agreement before the House Republicans and the Speaker of the House put forward a rule that injected the doc fix, which we support, into the budget agreement. So it's all going to be one whole thing. So they did that to take care of a real issue, the doc fix. But what did they leave out? They left out an extension of unemployment insurance for 1.3 million Americans who are going to lose that important support 3 days after Christmas. They left that out of that last-minute procedure. Now, as Mr. Levin said, he and I went to the Rules Committee last night and said, all right, if we're going to fix the SGR issue, let's deal with the unemployment compensation issue. And we presented an amendment. I have it in my hand. 3 months. And we said we'd pay for it. And we paid for it, Mr. Woodard, in a way that's been agreed by on a bipartisan basis, Mr. Woodall, on a bipartisan basis, which is in the Ag Bill negotiations, the Farm Bill negotiations, we've already agreed on a bipartisan and bicameral basis to get rid of these excessive direct payments, subsidies that go to agribusiness. We had agreed on that already. As of now, we've agreed on it. Let's use that savings, $6 billion of that savings, to make sure that 1.3 million Americans aren't left out in the cold. So I would say to my friend Mr. Woodall, if you want to make this a bipartisan agreement, all you have to do is vote for it. And if you want to vote for it, you've got to give this House an opportunity to vote for it. And yet, while we're going to get a chance to vote on the doc fix and the budget agreement, the Rules Committee and the Speaker of the House have told the American people, you won't allow a vote to help 1.3 million Americans who are going to be left out in the cold. And not just them and their struggling families, but the Congressional Budget Office tells us that their surrounding communities are going to be hurt, too. Why? They won't be able to make the rent payments. They won't be able to go out to the local stores around Christmas time and the holiday season to buy gifts. That hurts local merchants, small businesses. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office tells us we'll have 200,000 fewer of those jobs, private sector jobs, as a result of not extending unemployment insurance. So, Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely unconscionable and shameful that after we reached an agreement where we had wanted to include a fixed SGR and UI in the agreement, but it was decided not to, that we would have this last-minute thing parachuted on and leave the 1.3 million Americans out in the cold. That is shameful. You should allow a vote, and if you vote against the previous question, we'll have a chance to do our job and vote on that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume to say I think the gentleman characterized much of that exactly right. And his characterization of all we have to do to make his idea a bipartisan idea is to agree to do it his way. That's all we have to do. And that's not the way we reach agreements in this institution.
Would the gentleman yield on that?
In just one moment, I'd be happy to yield, my friend. We have here on the floor, Mr. Speaker, a rule, again, to bring bicameral bipartisan agreements on the budget, bipartisan bicameral agreements on Medicare, bipartisan bicameral agreements on the Farm Bill. And we have two of the finest minds in this institution, with two of the biggest hearts in this institution, who want to do the right thing for the American people, using this as their opportunity to try to get that done. I can promise my friends, Mr. Speaker, that we're not going to solve that problem here in the 1 hour of debate on this entirely separate measure. What the gentleman characterized as the agreement within the Budget Committee is we weren't going to be able to find an answer to SGR within the Budget Conference, and we didn't. We found it outside of the conference. We didn't find an answer to my issues with Medicare in the conference. We didn't find the answers to saving Social Security in the conference. So many things I wanted we didn't find in the conference. And the commitment that was made was to deal with UI outside of the conference. And I don't sit on any of the relevant committees for UI, but I take folks at their word that that is something we can solve outside the conference. We're not going to solve it here. And knowing that folks need that help, it is a great frustration to me, Mr. Speaker, that some of the finest minds in this Congress are focusing their energy on this hour while we are trying to move things forward that we do agree on, instead of focusing their energy trying to find that agreement on things we do not yet agree on, but we could agree on if folks would focus their energies in that direction. I'd be happy to yield to my friend from Maryland.
I thank my friend, Mr. Woodall. I would just point out, and I think the gentleman knows this, we have not seen a single proposal from our Republican colleagues to extend unemployment insurance because there is a philosophical difference, and a majority of our Republican colleagues don't think we should extend unemployment compensation for 1.3 million Americans. We've not seen a proposal. We paid for this proposal in a way that has bipartisan support. And I would just say the question is whether we should be able to vote on it. You know, my colleague and friends can vote against it, but I think the American people deserve a vote on this.
Reclaiming my time, I would say to my friend that I wouldn't want anyone to be confused who is listening to this debate that we can't find agreement on this in a bipartisan way. Why would folks come to that conclusion? Well, as much as has been said here on the floor. But the facts are that time and time and time again, these provisions have been extended, and they were not extended January 2013, February 2012, all the way back to the beginning. They were not extended on party line votes alone. They were extended in a bipartisan, bicameral way. Mr. Speaker, folks back home are, in just one moment, I'd be happy to yield to my friend. Folks back home are so frustrated, Mr. Speaker. They know that we can argue with each other. They're absolutely convinced we can do that. We do that well every single day. Today we have an opportunity in this rule to move forward those things that we have not found an easy agreement on, but things we have struggled to find agreement on for, again, not days, not weeks, in most cases months, in many cases years. And we have finally found that agreement. I do not believe, Mr. Speaker, it advances any of our causes to turn what should be an hour on those things that we are doing well together into any kind of an hour on accusations that somebody's right and somebody's wrong, and only if we do it one way can we find answers. And I'd be happy to yield 30 seconds to my friend.
I appreciate your courtesy, and I always enjoy coming before the Rules Committee. Just 2 points. First of all, maybe 3 quick ones. SGR was outside the budget agreement. It was decided to place it within it. All we're asking is for a vote on UI. And the third point, December 28th is a few days away. The axe falls on the livelihood of 1.3 million people. So if you'll say today that the Speaker will sit down with us on a bipartisan basis today and tomorrow and find an answer, fine. But just to say you're skipping town, not addressing this, and leaving an empty box, that's not a good answer.
Well, I would say to my friend, suggesting anyone is skipping town is also not a good answer. What the gentleman knows well, and it's so frustrating, Mr. Speaker, because again, much to the surprise of the odds makers all across this country, we've got 3 provisions before us today on which Republicans and Democrats on the House side and the Senate side, with the support of the White House, have been able to come together on. If we want to go down the road of moving things on which we don't have agreement, the gentleman knows those things don't move. If you want to make a difference for people, I say stop the recriminations and begin the conversations. That is the only way we have been able to find these agreements, Mr. Speaker. And I say to my folks back home, Mr. Speaker, it is not the happiest day in the life of their 7th District Congressman that we have these bills on the floor today. I would do something different in every single one of them. Every single one. I would do a lot of things different in every single one. And while I appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Speaker, perhaps one day if I'm Speaker of the House, I will have the power to do those things by myself. I think if you ask this Speaker, he'll say he does not have the power to do things alone. It takes herding 434 other cats to make that happen. But we have successes here today, hard-fought successes on behalf of the American people, not frivolous things, but things that are going to make a difference in people's lives. My colleague from New York mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, medical research. I'm a huge believer in medical research, huge believer in NIH. CDC stationed in my great home state of Georgia. We have an opportunity with this budget agreement to restore some funding to those two agencies that do amazing work on behalf of all Americans. In fact, in the case of the CDC, on behalf of the world. We should take advantage of these successes, Mr. Speaker, and then we should show up again. Maybe it's not even tomorrow. Maybe it's the very next hour and build on these successes to do more. But we've got that framework now. We know what it takes to come together and do things that matter to the American people, do things that make a difference for this land that we both love. We have that opportunity.
Would the gentleman yield for 30 seconds just on that? Just 30 seconds.
I would say to my friend that we're very lopsided on time. If the gentlelady runs out later in the hour, I'll be happy to yield to my friend. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlelady from New York.
I'm going to yield Mr. Van Hollen 30 seconds. This is very important.
30 seconds.
I thank my friend, Ms. Slaughter. The gentleman's right. And as I said at the outset of my comments, I support the bipartisan agreement. I think it's a small step forward. But the gentleman knows we'll be debating that issue later this afternoon. Right now, we're debating the rule of the House. And that rule parachuted in a dock fix for 3 months, which we support. But our Republican colleagues denied this House and the American people an opportunity to vote to extend UI in that rule. That's what we're debating right now, Mr. Woodall, and you know that. So this is about the rule, and the way this rule was struck. I'm on Ms. Slaughter's time now. The way that rule was structured was to deny the people of this country a vote to help 1.3 million Americans, and that is shameful.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair would inform the members that the gentlewoman from New York has 15 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Georgia has 7½ minutes remaining. Gentlewoman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, my colleague who's the ranking member on the Committee for Small Business, Ms. Velasquez.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the gentlelady from New York for yielding. In 16 days, 1.3 million Americans will lose the unemployment benefits they have relied on to buy groceries and keep a roof over their heads. And no, we are not creating fear. This is the reality for 1.3 million Americans who every day get up and go out to the job market to find out that there's no jobs available. This is the reality of American children who are suffering. This is the reality of 1.3 individuals in this country who will not know how they could pay for the next meal or how could they pay for their rent. This is not the American way. We took care of the doctors. We took care of big farmers at a time when the economy is still struggling in the wake of the 2008 financial collapse. We should not be revoking needed economic assistance from job seekers while millions of Americans are fighting to get back to work. Last year, unemployment insurance kept 2.5 million Americans and 0.6 million children out of poverty. If long-term jobless benefits are allowed to expire, next year there will be nothing to protect these families from long spells of unemployment. Unfortunately, this budget fails to extend the unemployment insurance millions of Americans rely on to make ends meet. Allowing jobless benefits to expire will not put people back to work. It will just make it harder for families to pay the bills and discourage people from seeking employment. I urge my colleagues to continue fighting for struggling Americans. and I hope that Americans are paying close attention to what is happening in Congress today. I urge a no vote on this rule.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself 30 seconds to remind my colleagues about the successes that we have had when we work together and about the terrible, terrible failures that we have had when we decide fussing with each other is better than seeking long-term solutions. One issue at a time, we can absolutely make a difference, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad that my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle have not come down to express all of their disappointments about everything that wasn't included. I hope that we'll be able to use this time to celebrate our successes on those things that were included and again rise tomorrow to solve the rest. I yield back.
Gentlewoman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield a minute to the gentlewoman from California, the Democrat leader, Ms. Pelosi, on this most important issue.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentlelady from New York for yielding, our ranking member on the Rules Committee, and thank her and our colleagues on that committee for trying so hard to have this rule contain an amendment that will allow us to vote on the extension of unemployment insurance for all nearly over 1.3 million Americans who will lose those benefits if we do not pass that extension. I would particularly salute Congressman Sandy Levin of Michigan, the ranking member on the Ways and Means Committee, for his relentless championing of this issue of fairness to the American people. We come here to talk about a bill that is to end the sequester. And then end the sequester it does, and I commend the conferees. I'm very proud of the work of Congressman Chris Van Hollen, the ranking member on the Budget Committee on the Democratic side, Nita Lowey, the ranking member on Appropriations, our assistant leader, Mr. Clyburn, representing the leadership in those negotiations. I thank them for taking this to a place, fighting it to a draw, so that we come to the floor to fight something to end sequestration. But the opportunity was so much greater. And apparently the Republicans never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity when it comes to creating jobs. Mr. Van Hollen had in his bill just a few points in terms of priorities. One was to create jobs and economic growth for our country in the short term and in the long term. If we close one loop, close a loophole, build the infrastructure of America. Close a loophole, build a bridge. Close a loophole, special interest, tax loopholes for special interest. Invest in the human infrastructure of our country. Early childhood education, long-term economic growth. Close a loophole. Pay for unemployment insurance. I don't think it has to be paid for because it's emergency spending, but nonetheless, let's have an opportunity to vote to extend unemployment benefits. When we ignore those investments in the future, we're not reducing the deficit, we're increasing the deficit. Because nothing brings more money to the Treasury than creating jobs and the revenue that produces. Nothing brings more money to the Treasury than the education of the American people, starting with early childhood education. And as far as unemployment benefits are concerned, the economic impact is clear. Every dollar spent on unemployment benefits grows the economy by $1.52, according to Moody's Analytics. $1.50 for every dollar we spend, and that's a conservative estimate. Failing to extend unemployment benefits will cost us 200,000 jobs over the next year. We can't do that. A recent report shows that extending UI instead would produce 300,000 jobs. So again, this money is if spent immediately, injects demand into the economy, creates jobs, grows the economy, as well as honoring our social compact that we have with the American people. People work hard, play by the rules, lose their job through no fault of their own. Insurance is what they have. We should honor that insurance. So it's disappointing, yes, because this package is so limited. But as I said, it was fight to a draw. I recommend that our colleagues vote to support it so we can take it off the table and make way for the discussion we should be having about comprehensive immigration reform. The votes are here. Give us a vote, Mr. Speaker. Passing a farm bill, very important to the economy of our country. Raise the minimum wage. Nearly two-thirds of the people making the minimum wage are women. Paycheck equity. Have fairness in the workplace for women. The list goes on and on. ENDA, ending discrimination against LGBT community people in the workplace. There's so many items on the agenda that have the support of the American people in large numbers. Yesterday was the anniversary of Newtown. Passed the Brady background bill. All these things are an agenda we have neglected up until now. We just haven't had time for it. I guess they haven't been priorities for this Congress, but they are priorities for the American people and for the Democrats in Congress. So again, one reason to vote for this package, even though you may think it's meager and you may not like all of its priorities, as the gentleman said, is to at least have an agreement on the budget that enables us to move forward for bigger fights that will improve policy, improve the lives of the American people, honor our responsibilities to them. But I urge our colleagues to vote for the budget, but to vote against this rule, because this rule says no. It says no to the Congress. We're not even going to allow you to speak or vote on unemployment insurance benefits extension. It says no to the American people, that if you work hard and play by the rules and lose your job through no fault of your own, the safety net isn't there. And that safety net is not there just for individuals. It's there for the system. Our beautiful free market system grows in cycles, and sometimes unemployment is higher than others, and there's some outside forces at work that people lose their jobs because of. And so it's about a safety net for our economic system as well as for individuals. Why would they not allow us to bring this up and extend this extension? Is it the money? It's not. If it's the money, we'll find it. Is the price? Do you think the price is too hard to give people dignity, to allow them to keep their homes and meet the needs of their children? 2 million children would be affected by this. Tens of thousands of veterans affected by this. We care about veterans here, we care about children here, but apparently not enough to extend unemployment benefits. So why, my Republican colleagues, would you not allow us to have a vote on this? I know the support is there on the Republican side. I know that the Democrats would vote 100% for this. Do you not believe that these people are worthy of receiving an unemployment insurance? I say insurance, that's something paid into a benefit check. If so, let the American people know that. But this debate will not end today. While you may not give us a vote on the floor to extend these benefits, so we see where everybody is on the subject and why, this fight will continue, because this is about the morality of our country, the respect that we have for people, the value that we place on work, the pride we take in the great work ethic of the American people. But sometimes it just seems the harder they work, there are forces that are in a deck stacked against them, and this Congress is saying this deck is not going to include you as we deal out the cards. So it's really, I can't explain it to anybody except to say it's a values decision. And apparently there's not enough shared values on the subject of the respect we should have for our workers to even honor the subject with the vote on the floor of the House. It's an outrageous rule to come to the floor. I thank you, Madam Chair, for fighting it, and I urge a very strong no vote on the rule, vote no on the previous question, which would allow us to bring the, what are you afraid of? Are you afraid of the vote? Are you afraid of working people who are out of a job? What are you afraid of? Let us have a vote on the floor. With that, Mr. Speaker, urging a no vote on the rule, a yes on the bill, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume to go back to a place I was earlier, and that is how one of the worst things we do in this institution is create fears in the minds of the American people. The gentlelady from California has a powerful voice. She is listened to, admired, and respected across this great land, and it has to be said. I was just in a hearing, Mr. Speaker, in the Oversight Committee where we were hearing from doctors who were talking about all the fears their patients had that they were going to lose access to their doctor and lose access to their pharmaceuticals because of Obamacare. Now, those fears have been realized. That's exactly what happened to those patients. But these fears are not realized. I want to make clear to everybody back home, because I talk to constituents every day who are losing their jobs in response to what their employers are doing to be able to afford the Obamacare mandates. They're losing their jobs, Mr. Speaker, and absolutely every week of state unemployment that has always been available to them will continue to be available to them. Fear not from what you're hearing on the other side of the aisle. Mr. Speaker, for those folks who are losing their jobs in my district as their employers are trying to comply with those mandates, understand that every week that you've paid your insurance premiums for unemployment insurance, all of those federal weeks that have been there for not for a year, not for 5 years, but for decades, those will still be there for you. Fear not, that's still there. What we're talking about here today, Mr. Speaker, are benefits in the emergency unemployment category, benefits that folks have not paid the insurance premiums for, benefits that are absolutely being utilized by families across this country. I don't minimize the impact of those going away. I don't minimize the impact. But I reject, Mr. Speaker, the fear creation that coming to the floor of the House and saying unemployment benefits are going away tomorrow is going to create in my district. Folks are losing their jobs today. Why? Because after we do job creation bill after job creation bill after job creation bill, I can't find the bipartisan bicameral agreements on those. I'm going to keep looking, but I haven't found it yet. My message, Mr. Speaker, is if you are losing your job today, the gentleman yield because of the heavy foot, I won't yield. I'm running low on time, but I know my friend has much time remaining. If you are one of those folks in my district or others who are losing your job because the heavy hand of government is on your employer, those unemployment benefits on which you are counting to apply tomorrow will be there. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlelady from New York.
I have to give myself 30 seconds. Mr. Woodall, if you believe anything at all that you have just said, I understand what's going on here. First, blame everything in the world on Obamacare. There's something I will not. To try to give people health insurance is somehow a crime in the House of Representatives. But the people we're talking about on unemployment have exhausted their unemployment. It will not be there, Mr. Woodall. They can lose their housing. They can lose their food. They certainly are going to, they may even be dispossessed out into the street. There is a meanness that's going on in this that absolutely astonishes me.
Did not mean to suggest there's meanness going on. I would ask the
gentlewoman's time has expired. Gentlewoman's time has expired.
I didn't get to speak because he took it.
I would ask
gentlewoman's time is expired. Who yields time? Chair would remind all members to direct their remarks to the chair.
I'd like to, Mr. Speaker, and I started out that way. Thank you very much. I will yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Energy and Commerce, Environment and Ranking Subcommittee Ranking Member, Mr. Tonko, who I hope we can really finish my thoughts. Thank you.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and absolutely, those benefits have been exhausted, and I think that needs to be very clear here. While this budget compromise is not perfect, I would like to highlight a provision that will reduce our deficit. Since 2011, I have fought to change a little-known statutory formula for capping the maximum reimbursement for federal contractor executives and employees. Due to a flaw in this formula, taxpayers-funded salaries have spiraled out of control in recent years. Just this month, OMB announced that it was required to raise the cap to over $950,000 per year. $950,000. While we debate our ability to afford essential services for our most vulnerable citizens, for extending unemployment insurance and all, we are paying private sector executives nearly $1 million salaries. This agreement sets the cap at $487,000. Personally, I would have preferred the cap to be set at $230,700, the Vice President's salary as it's stated in my legislation. But this is an important step and sensible compromise to restoring sanity to taxpayer-funded salaries. Just a sampling within GAO within the Department of Defense found 7% of their contracts, when reduced to this level, would save hundreds of millions of dollars. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back and thank again the gentlelady for yielding.
Chair would inform members that the gentleman from Georgia has 4.5 minutes remaining. The gentlewoman from New York has 10 minutes remaining.
Mr. Speaker, given that imbalance, I will reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I will yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, member of the Committee on the Budget, and author of that amendment we're trying to get here, Ms. Lee.
Gentlewoman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the gentlelady for yielding and for her tremendous leadership in her capacity as our ranking member on the Rules Committee. Thank you so much for standing in strong opposition to this rule. As a member of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, I really want to commend all of my colleagues putting forth a plan to replace some of the reckless sequester cuts that do continue to hurt families each and every day. Yet this budget deal is really outrageous for what it doesn't do. It does nothing to extend emergency unemployment benefits to the millions of jobless workers in every state. As the Center on Budget and Priorities report today points out, the failure to include any extension of federal emergency jobless benefits in the deal would likely negate any boost from sequester this deal would bring. So I'd ask unanimous consent to add this report to the record, Mr.
Without
Speaker.
objection.
Over 170 Democrats have joined my letter calling for an extension of this critical lifeline. It is really shameful that Republicans have refused to include an extension of unemployment benefits. The least we can do for the millions of the long-term unemployed who are struggling just to get by during this holiday season is to pass this 3-month extension. This budget does nothing for the millions of jobless people and asks nothing from the people who caused our economic crisis and continues to benefit from economic inequality. Please remember, this is not about showboating or statistics. We are talking about people's lives. We are talking about people living on the edge. We are talking about 1.3 million people who will lose unemployment benefits during this holiday season. It is cruel, it is morally wrong, and it is economically stupid. So I hope that we can vote no on this rule and defeat the previous question so we can vote for a 3-month extension of unemployment compensation. Finally, let me just say we must do better. We must protect and expand the safety net that are the pillars of our society.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
I don't think so.
You know, it is very good that we have a deal. The American people are frustrated and tired, and so our officers are being bombarded by calls from people from all political perspectives that they're glad for the deal. And to be honest with you, I'm glad that we've made some progress. Many of us want to be part of the deal. But I know that it is equally important to raise the concern of faces like this, faces across America who equal the 1.3 million number of Americans who will lose their unemployment benefits. 3.5 million in 2014, 200,000 military veterans, and 2 million children. And so we can't be only about ourselves in this holiday season, particularly as we recognize that the Pope, being named Man of the Year, has spoken to the world eloquently about this whole issue of the vulnerable. And so I'd ask this, Mr. Woodall, in the Rules Committee, let's put the Van Hollen, Lee, and Levin amendment on the floor tonight, tomorrow. Call us back, Mr. Boehner. Call us back, Mr. Boehner. Let us vote to provide for unemployment insurance for working men and women
time has expired.
so that faces across America will not have the tear of desperation on their
Gentlewoman's time is expired.
The deal is good.
The gentlewoman's time is expired.
We cannot allow this to happen in this season of joy.
The gentlewoman will suspend. The gentlewoman's time is expired. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, it's my great pleasure to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Messer.
The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman from Georgia for yielding his time. I rise in support of the Bipartisan Budget Act, the underlying rule, and Chairman Ryan's hard work. This isn't a perfect deal, but it is better than the alternative. This bill replaces some of the indiscriminate spending cuts called for by sequestration and replaces it with smarter ones. It makes modest reforms that will reduce the deficit without raising taxes. And it continues our nation's trajectory toward a more fiscally responsible government. I agree with those critics who say this bill doesn't solve all of our nation's budget problems. But no can't always be the answer. Reality is that we have a Democratic president and a Democratic-led Senate. Given that reality, this is a solid deal. And virtually everyone agrees we don't need another government shutdown. It's time to put politics aside and make genuine progress on ending wasteful Washington spending. This is a good first step in that direction. Let's not be afraid to take that step and move forward toward common ground from which we can continue fighting for fiscal sanity for hardworking taxpayers.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentlewoman from New York.
Thanks, Brad.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, member of the Committee on Ways and Means, Mr. Davis.
Gentleman's recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the ranking member for yielding. I rise in opposition to this rule, and I don't do so because it gives us limited opportunity to keep the government open for a few days. And I know that we're going to allow our physicians to practice medicine so that they can take care of Medicare patients for a few more days. But what it does not do, it does not extend unemployment insurance for those 2 million or more people who will not have it. This is not going to be a good Christmas for many of the people in my district. It's going to be just the opposite. So I vote against the rule so that we can, in fact, come back and provide unemployment compensation to those millions who need it. And I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Rhode Island, a member of the Committee on the Budget, Mr. Cicilline.
Gentleman's recognized for 1.5 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Speaker, the budget deal that we're voting on today is a step in the right direction because it blunts some of the painful cuts caused by sequestration. But a critical piece is missing, extending unemployment benefits that are due to expire at the end of this year. It is an absolute disgrace that this body would even consider leaving town without finishing our work and ensuring that we address the needs of the long-term unemployed. Just 3 days after Christmas, 1.3 million Americans struggling to find work will immediately be thrown out into the cold and lose their unemployment assistance, including 4,900 Rhode Islanders who will lose their benefits on December 28th. Much of the economic gain achieved in this budget deal will be nearly wiped out by failing to extend unemployment insurance. Mr. Speaker, how do you plan to explain to your constituents your 3-week vacation when you have constituents who won't be able to keep the heat on or put the next meal on their dinner table because Congress failed to do its job? We should every day, but especially during this time of year, be thinking of others and taking care of one another, not walking away from our responsibilities and ignoring the challenges facing our fellow citizens. We have 15 days to figure this out. What's the rush to leave town? And it won't take much time to resolve this problem because we already have the answer. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the House call up H.R. 3546 for immediate consideration. This will extend unemployment benefits for 1.3 million Americans.
Gentleman from Georgia, yield for unanimous consent request.
No.
Does not yield.
Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote against this rule, to stand up and fight for the 1.3 million Americans who will lose their benefits on December 28th.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank my good friend from New York for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I don't see how my colleagues can go home for Christmas leaving their constituents who are unemployed with no Christmas at all. I understand this bill to be important for its elimination of sequestration. That's a small favor considering that sequestration may be the only bill that nobody ever wanted that ever came into existence in this country. But the careless treatment of the unemployed is unforgivable, especially at this season. And I am really outraged by the notion that some of my colleagues make about the incentive to remain on unemployment insurance. The benefits per week have gone down 1/3 across the states. We're exposing those who've worked, paid into unemployment, those in hard times, but we're also exposing our economy itself, because the loss of unemployment insurance means another loss of 300,000 jobs because of the loss of unemployment insurance. This bill is counterproductive, it's counterintuitive, it spoils an otherwise acceptable bill. It makes a mockery of Christmas.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair would inform each side that they each have 3.5 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire if my colleague has further speakers? If not, I'm prepared to close.
I am the final speaker on our side.
Then I yield myself the remaining time.
Recognized for 3.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, today's proposal is a step in the right direction, but we must improve this bill before we vote on final passage. What have we learned here today? We've learned first that during the budget negotiations that it was determined that the doc fix, as we call it, for doctors' payments and unemployment insurance were decided not to be within the scope of what they were doing, and they would do that separately. And then, unbeknownst to us on our side, after agreeing to that, only the doc fix, as we call it, was put back into this bill. It was supposed to be separate, it was a part of the rule, and it would be voted on automatically when we vote for this rule today. Only thing left out was unemployment extension, and I think we know why. We heard from my colleague that he thinks there's plenty of money out there. They're not going to go without a thing. Totally untrue. It would be a tragedy of gigantic proportions if this House turned down the extension of unemployment benefits because some members believe that it's not going to happen. It is going to happen. And it was not because we didn't try in the Rules Committee to try to explain it. There is no justification in the world for turning down a 3-month extension in the dead of winter that is paid for, that adds not a penny to anything. And there was no bipartisanship in the Rules Committee on this last night. We did our very best, but we're outnumbered considerably, 9-4. But nonetheless, we think it's important enough today to give every member of this House a second chance. And we're going to ask everybody who wants to make sure the people in their districts who are unemployed through no fault of their own, there has been sort of a prevailing thought that we've heard from time to time that if we don't extend employment insurance, we'll teach them a lesson. We'll teach them not to have a job. They'll find out right away that that's not the way to live. That despite the fact that, as it was pointed out, 20,000 people applied for 600 jobs. Gives you some idea of what that's like. Some people have come before committees here with stacks of resumes that they've sent out as high as 2 feet with rejection notices that they've gotten. They're not there. We are going to give another chance. On the previous question, I want everybody on both sides of the aisle who believes they cannot go home, and we did have a resolution here not to go home till our work is finished, but that we will take care of our fellow Americans in need, which we hope is temporary, and that again depends very much on what we do in the future. We will give you a chance. If we vote no on the previous question to this rule, then I will be allowed to bring up the amendment that was turned down last night to extend it for 3 months. Imagine that, 3 months, all paid for again. So it is really appalling to me that we can fix anything here, but we can literally let children, veterans, people who are unable to work, the disabled, and the people who have lost their jobs, that we can say to them, it doesn't matter here. in the House of Representatives if you're hungry, if you're cold, if you're going to lose the place that you live, if your sustenance is taken away from you. We don't care, maybe some church somewhere, some temple, some synagogue will take care of you. So if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to allow the House to extend unemployment insurance for $1.3 million. And I urge my colleagues to vote no. I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of the amendment in the record along with extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question. Urge my colleagues to vote no. If the previous question does not go down, I urge a no vote on the rule.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentleman's recognized for 3.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I'm surprised we've spent most of the hour talking about what's not in this rule today. Because we have great cause for celebration for what is in this rule today. It's not been months, it's been years we've been working to get a farm bill. There's an extension that this rule allows to be voted on that will bring us in the next 30 days that agreement that we have been so long searching for. Mr. Speaker, it's been since 1997 that the SGR has been a part of our lingo here. That's that provision that threatens access to health care for every senior in America. This bill today, this rule today, allows us to have a vote on a bipartisan, bicameral solution to that. It's actually a 3-month extension that leads to the end of this discussion forever, putting at ease every senior's mind in America that around this time of the year, every year, their access to care will be threatened. And perhaps most importantly, Mr. Speaker, this rule allows for a vote on the bipartisan, bicameral budget agreement. Now, this is not a grand agreement. It's not the grand agreement that I've been fighting for on the Budget Committee for the last 3 years. But what it is a small step in the right direction. The reason it's a small step in the right direction, Mr. Speaker, is that we take those sequester cuts that no one would argue were done in a discriminate manner. We preserve those savings, but we apply them in a much more discriminate manner. For me, that's national security. The concern has always been national security. Today, the Air Force units have reduced their training activities by about 25%, Mr. Speaker. With the sequester, only 2 of 43 brigade combat teams, active brigade combat teams, are ready or available for deployment in the United States Army. 2 of 43. We absolutely must rein in federal spending. This budget agreement does that. But we must do so in a responsible way that preserves our national security. The sequester reductions that were coming up in January, as many of my friends know, fell on no program in the land except for our armed forces, except for our national security. The Constitution does not ask much of us in this House, Mr. Speaker. Far too often we're doing too much here as opposed to not enough. But it asks us to protect and preserve our national security. And with this bill today, while it does not achieve my Medicare goals, while it does not achieve my Social Security goals, while it does not achieve the budget reduction goals I would like to see, it does replace an indiscriminate sequester with discriminate reductions in mandatory spending programs, putting those dollars instead towards our national security. I'll end where I began, Mr. Speaker, with the letter from Thomas Jefferson to Charles Clay in 1790. The ground of liberty is to be gained by inches, and we must be contented to secure what we can from time to time and eternally press forward for what is yet to get. I urge a strong yes vote on this rule, a no vote on my colleague's motion, so that we do those things that we were able to do today, and then tomorrow eternally press forward. Mr. Speaker, with that, I yield back the balance of my time. I move the previous question on the resolution.
The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it.
Request the yeas and nays.
Does the gentlelady, the yeas and nays are requested. Those in favor of taking a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having arisen. The yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 9, Clause 8 and 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on ordering the previous question will be followed by 5-minute votes on adoption of the House Resolution 438, if ordered, and agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal, if ordered. Again, this is a 15-minute vote on ordering the previous question.
So the House now in a procedural vote ahead of what could be several more votes to come, including a vote on the rules of debate for the 2-year federal budget agreement and the short-term extension of the Farm Bill. John Shaw, the congressional correspondent for Market News International, is joining us from the Capitol. We watched and heard from Democrats, a number of Democrats unhappy about the exclusion of federal unemployment benefits. There were reports yesterday that the budget deal might be in jeopardy because of that. Where do things stand today?
I think right now it looks like it's going to pass the House. Both the House Speaker, John Boehner, and the House Minority Leader, Nancy Pelosi, had separate press conferences today in which they both endorsed the package. Boehner with a little bit more enthusiasm than Pelosi. Boehner saying he thinks it actually continues to advance Republican goals. Pelosi just basically said it provides for a modicum of stability. She called it a draw and said that this would just allow the government to continue to function and to move on to other issues. So you have leadership supporting a measure which is very unusual in this Congress. Certainly there's going to be some conservative Republicans who will vote against the budget package, and there's likely to be some liberal Democrats who will vote against it. So it will be an interesting bipartisan vote. I think what's been also interesting is I think the Democratic leadership has sort of been holding back and signaling that the Republicans are going to have to do a lot of the heavy lifting on this. I think maybe a lot of the Democratic votes will come late in the vote. I think the Democratic leadership believes that that this is something that the Republicans should be the lead force in pushing it through the House.
Now, you wrote today that Senate Republicans and House Democrats were less central to the talks leading up to the budget agreement. Why was that?
Well, this was an agreement that was basically crafted by the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, Patty Murray, and the chairman of the House Budget Committee, Paul Ryan, each representing the majority party in their chamber. So it's basically been Senate Democrats and House Republicans who have put this deal together. Now, they have been conferring across chambers and so forth. But it is interesting because you've had a circumstance in which, like yesterday, for example, House Speaker Boehner and Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid both endorsed the package, but House Democratic leaders were very cautious. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell has signaled that he is likely to oppose the package. So it's a very curious coalition that's forming, and I think it sort of speaks to the fact that this is what someone called a minimalist agreement. This is not, as many of the speakers have said, a sweepingly ambitious fiscal program. It's basically trying to keep the federal government running for the next 2 years. They've boosted discretionary spending a little bit above what it was supposed to be. They made some minor adjustments in both entitlements, some additional revenues, and they've put together, you know, as I say, kind of a minimalist package that should provide a little bit of stability, which, given the almost nonstop budget fighting over the last 3 years, is, in the view of a lot of people, a step in the right direction.
So what about the Senate? How's the budget deal likely to fare in that body?
You know, I think it's likely to pass next week. They're in a very kind of angry mood over there on nomination votes and the Senate rules changes votes. So it's not a very pleasant mood on the Senate side of the Capitol. But Majority Leader Reid said that they will be moving forward next week on the budget package. I think the Senate Democrats will probably have to do the bulk of the work, but I think there's going to be a number of Republicans that will join them. So I think it's likely to pass in the Senate next week, and then your fiscal battles will suspend for a couple months, but come early next spring, there's going to be a battle on the debt ceiling legislation. In fact, the Speaker was asked about that today at a press conference, and he basically said, well, let me just get this budget agreement passed, and I'll worry about that a little bit down the road. And it will be interesting because Republicans in the past have demanded a price from President Obama and Democrats to increase the debt ceiling, and it's not really clear what their price will be come next spring because they've had a protracted fight on the debt ceiling this past October, It seems like that has been suspended. They've reached a kind of a short-term agreement now. So it's unclear what the terms of the fiscal debate are going to be in March when the debt ceiling comes back to the table.
The other item on the table today in the House, they're scheduled to bring up the 2014 Defense Programs Bill under suspension of the rules, a procedure used to quickly move typically non-controversial bills. Why is it coming up that way?
Well, this has been a very contentious issue, and I think congressional leadership has always prided itself in being able to pass a defense authorization bill. I think they've done it for more than 50 consecutive years. So a decision was made to pass one this year, and they decided to, kind of a bipartisan leadership decided to craft the bill and not open it up for amendments. And oftentimes this is the package that leads to far-reaching debates on almost every issue. They decided to just do a more bare-bones bill, about a $550 billion authorization bill, and move it through without opening it up to amendment. You're going to have some resistance and grumbling, but I think the view is it's going to pass the House today and likely pass the Senate next week.
John Shaw, congressional correspondent for Market News International. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
So this procedural vote continues in the House ahead of a vote on the debate rules, that is, for the two-year federal budget agreement and the short-term extension of the Farm Bill. We'd like to hear from you this afternoon. Republicans, call us at 202-585-3885. Democrats, your line is 202-585-3886. All others and independents, 202-585-3887. Weigh in today on your thoughts on this two-year federal budget agreement. The agreement made by Republican House Budget Committee Chair Paul Ryan and Democratic Senate Budget Committee Chair Patty Murray worked out several days ago. It raises the overall spending, federal spending over the next 2 years by reducing some of the sequestration cuts, but it also cuts other mandatory programs and raises some federal fees, including one on airplane tickets and other travel fees. The bill requires new federal workers to pay more into their retirement funds and cuts the cost of living adjustment for military retirees under age 62, what the measure considers so-called working age retirees. The measure also blocks an upcoming cut in Medicare payments to doctors and increases their reimbursement by 0.5% through March. The White House says it supports the agreement, as does the House Republican and Democratic leadership, but many members on both sides have expressed their disapproval of the two-year federal budget agreement. We'll go to the calls in just a moment. I should mention that the Senate, by the way, has been in session continuously since yesterday at 2 Eastern Time in the afternoon, debating a number of nominations. Republicans so far insisting on using all debate time allotted to them. Live coverage of the Senate on C-SPAN 2. Dependent. Go ahead. We'll go to your calls now to the independent line. West Point, Connecticut, you're on. Go ahead. I'm sorry, West Point, Tennessee. Are you with us?
Yes, I have a question about the budget bill they're proposing. I was told that the Smart Sentencing Act is attached to that. Is that true?
My suggestion would be to go online to our website and check the information there. The basics of the bill include cuts to a number of mandatory programs and raises a number of federal fees, and the measure also blocks an upcoming cut in Medicare payments to doctors. Republican line, Ken from Englewood, Florida. Go ahead.
I was a first sergeant in the Army for 23 years now, so I'm going to get hit by this cost of living decrease of 1%. And I just want to make a comment that I've been retired for 5 years. I'm an Iraqi vet. I served in Panama. I've been deployed multiple times. During these 5 years, I have not gone one single year without the Congress threatening my benefits, be it TRICARE, now it's cost of living. And I am disgusted with the Republicans, and I am going independent or Democrat. I just can't believe that they could compare military service to hardworking civilians. I mean, it's outrageous. Thank you very much.
John in Herndon, Virginia. Go ahead.
Hello, yes. I'd like to know why the agricultural bill extension is getting a vote today, and an extension of the unemployment insurance is not going to get a vote, at least by the way the current voting looks to be going.
Our next call is a Democrat from Staten Island. Go ahead.
Hello, how are you doing today?
Good, thanks.
My major concern with this bill is the 1.3 million people who will immediately be affected by this unemployment failure to do the extension. And right now I'm a little bit ashamed to be a Democrat because this is not what we stand for. President Obama himself said he would not even consider any bill that didn't include the unemployment. Speaker Pelosi said the same thing, and Bernie Sanders, who's a very, very vocal opponent for the working class, has also said this. But where are they now when 1.3 million people are going to be cut off? Statistics show that every dollar spent in the program yields $1.50 into the economy. It creates jobs because people have more money to spend. And by the end of 2014, this is going to impact over 4 million Americans in a time where there are no jobs. This unemployment isn't even the 7% or above where it is now. Is not even taking into effect the people who have given up job search, and the people that are working part-time. So the numbers are drastically higher than what we're seeing as their forecast. So I'm ashamed to be a Democrat right now for the holiday spirit of just throwing 1.3 million people immediately under the bus after Christmas, and then for them to affect over $4 million in the upcoming year. And I think that's shameful, and I hope that President Obama has the right to stand up to the GOP and the Tea Party, because lately I've been thinking there are more terrorists in Washington than there are al-Qaeda and Taliban.
Thanks for the call. Lee in Bakersfield, California on the Republican line. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was calling because I'm just sick of the gridlock. You know, the people that don't want to bend one bit should not be in politics. And I think we need to go forward with this budget agreement. I don't agree with it, but at least it's a start. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the call. We're in a procedural vote ahead of a vote on the rules for debate of the on the 2-year federal budget agreement and the short-term extension of the Farm Bill. David in Roslyn, Washington is an independent and on the line with us. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple comments. One on Nancy Pelosi's statement about how we don't need to fund the unemployment extension. I think maybe that's how we got into a $16 trillion deficit in the first place. And also the Congresswoman from New York who said that people are given health insurance. They're not really given health insurance. People that are paying for health insurance are losing it and having to buy it back at a higher rate, and that's what's paying for the health insurance. Nobody's given it at all. Kind of interesting comments. Thank you.
Go to Victorville, California on the Democrats line. Ron is on with us.
Good morning.
Hello there.
Just a comment.
Go ahead.
I think a lot of our people in this country are uninformed as to what either side really wants to do and how hard they've been working to try to get together. That being said, just on the wage limit increase, if they raise it to $10, say, or $11, that would do two things. That would increase buying power to the public, and it would also increase tax revenue to Washington, and it would create that cycle of recycling money. And if we can once get some of these items like infrastructure approved, I think we're on the go. But we have to quit dividing and making everybody look bad from the other side of the aisle and work together. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the call. Members still to vote, quite a few members still to vote on this procedural vote ahead of a vote on the rules for debate for the 2-year federal budget agreement and the short-term extension of the Farm Bill. Meredith from Rocky River, Ohio, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
First, I want to say one thing. I'm a Republican. I've been a Republican, I think, since the day I was born. My family were Republicans. It's very difficult to be a Republican today with the things that the extreme right wing of the Republican Party are doing. I used to think I was an extreme radical Republican until I really met one and scared the hell out of me. On the vote today, on the present vote and the next vote for procedure, I certainly hope those will pass to get to actually voting on the bill. I have some real questions about the bill as it's being put forward. I just don't think that kicking the ball down to things for 9 years ahead on paying for things is right. You know, I think most people in this country, probably 80% of the people in this country, try to work on a cash basis and pay what they owe. They may have a mortgage on a car or a home or something, but they work on a cash basis. They don't put everything down the line. And I think the Congress should do the same. Also, I have a real problem as far as the social issues are concerned with the particularly the unemployment thing. Yes, it's a liberal issue, and I'm tend to be more conservative, moderate, but we are spending billions of dollars in Afghanistan, which much of it is going into private pockets' hands, and if we're going to spend that much money for those people, why can't we take the care of the people in this country, our own people?
Thanks for calling. Debate on the federal budget agreement and a vote on final passage is expected today. As far as the Farm Bill extension goes, we expect a debate to get underway today, but it should be finished at some point tomorrow in the House. This procedural vote continues, and we continue to take your calls on the line for independence. Nancy from Overton, Texas. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I want to know what they're going to do about all these people on welfare, food stamps, and disability. I know of 15 people, myself, on disability. Every one of these people can and are able to work but don't want to. Half of them are drug dealers. These people on welfare, why can't they get up every morning just like we do and they go and do charity work for the money that we are giving them? Why are we the only ones working? Why can't they work too?
Barbara from Arlington, Texas, you're on the line with us. What do you think?
Well, I agree with the previous caller. I mean, the cradle-to-grave mentality in this country has really upset me. This is the first time that I've ever made a call, but this, I mean, you know, it's on the backs of the working people. Now, I worked as a registered nurse for 38 years. I'm still working, and, you know, I'm from the, you know, the 50s mentality, and this country is going down the drain. I mean, there are so many people that have just suddenly ran for the unemployment benefits so they can lay around for 9 months and want another 99 weeks. I mean, it's got me so upset. This country is going to hell. I mean, what's wrong with getting a job? Now, in Texas, I mean, I see job, help wanted, help wanted. Why can't somebody get off the sofa and go to work?
Thanks for your call. Jerry in Totowa, New Jersey, an independent caller is with us.
Yes. I agree with the bipartisan agreement, yes. However, the Affordable Care Bill that was passed, and there's going now. The local congressman had a meeting with local students here in the area, and urging them to sign up for this Affordable Care Bill, right, for benefits. However, if they don't sign up, there's a penalty. Well, if they can't afford to pay for a policy, how are they going to afford to pay a penalty? And where's this penalty going to go? It's going to go back to the government? Nobody's talked about this penalty that people have to pay. I'd like to hear something about that.
Thanks for the call. About 40 members of the House yet to vote in this procedural vote on ordering the previous question, ahead of a vote on the rule for debate of the two-year federal budget agreement, as well as a short-term extension of the Farm Bill. The debate and vote on the budget agreement itself expected later today. Let's go to a Democrat from Utica, Kentucky. Francis is with us. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I'm a registered Democrat. I personally believe in voting for the candidate who I think is going to do the best for my community and for our country. However, what really upsets me today and looking at the voting is party voting. Here we have 211 Republicans for it, 184 against it. That's our problem today in Washington. It's not about the people no more. It's about their party. It's the Republican Party versus the Democratic Party. We've got to get away from that mentality and go back to representing the people out here.
Wayne from Derry, New Hampshire is with us now on the Republican line.
Hello, yes. I am. I'm not going to be a Republican anymore. These guys get, what, $175,000 a year, plus they get a pension, plus they get a 401k. People that are on unemployment pay taxes on that money, and we're paying them when we're laid off. It's disgusting. I changed my party. Thank you, sir.
And a last call from Howardsville, Virginia. Robert, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for your time. I don't agree with a couple of the people who came on prior to me. We're not talking about drug dealers and people who refuse to work. We're talking about those who have lost their jobs. We had a contract with DOD, and we lost their contract because of budget cuts. But we're talking about people who have worked hard, tried to do right for their families, and they're losing their unemployment insurance. These are the people that I'm talking about, and this is my major concern. We need to do a better job for these people. I mean, it's not their fault. Some people, they may be doing the wrong thing, but we're talking about those who play by the rules and try to do things right. We need to do a better job. We're a larger country. We're expanding money in other areas. We can't let these people just say, hey, lose your home and get you a paper bag or a box and take you and your family and live underneath that in the street. That's unacceptable.
And thanks for the call. The House is working today on a two-year federal budget agreement released earlier this week. It reduces the sequester budget cuts and as a result increases overall federal spending, but it still cuts a number of programs and increases some fees. This procedural vote about to wrap up on the floor of the House. Live coverage on C-SPAN.
Yeas are 227, the nays 195. The previous question is ordered, and the House will be in order. The House will be in order. Members will please take their seats. The House will be in order. The chair lays before the House a communication.